So 1.1, defining economics. A few of today's goals that we want to be able to do is define scarcity and then understand how scarcity applies within economics. Also, we're going to look at goods and services. We want to be able to differentiate between those and then also categorize goods and services based on certain characteristics. We'll also look at the factors of production. We want to be able to identify those factors and then also provide examples of those. You also might see the factors of production referred to as resources or as inputs. And then finally, once we understand what those factors of production are, we want to be able to list the three questions that every society must ask themselves when facing this problem of scarcity that we see within economics. Scarcity is going to kind of be central again to all of what we talk about today. So first and foremost, we have to go back and discuss what is economics. Well, a really simple way to kind of explain it is just to say that it's the social science that concerns itself with decision making. And we'll see why it concerns itself with decision making here in a minute. But we have to ask ourselves too, why do we have to make decisions at all? Well, when it comes down to it, in society, we as people have virtually unlimited amount of things that we want or things that we need. However, we can't always have all of those wants and needs satisfied. And the reason is that the resources that are available are limited. So if our wants and needs are unlimited, but the resources to get those things are limited, we have a problem. And this problem is referred to as scarcity. You might have heard the word scarce or scarcity before when talking about maybe food is scarce or clean water is scarce, meaning just that there's a limited amount. So we have to make decisions because there's a limited amount of resources, and we have to decide what are we going to do with those resources in order to satisfy all these wants and needs that people have. So, what is economics? Well, kind of a textbook definition we could say is that economics is the study of how people try to satisfy their wants and needs whenever there's a limited amount or scarce resources. And again, that's going to be the definition we kind of work with all year. Now, again, to kind of take that big textbook definition and just bring it back down to the main idea, economics is just studying how do we deal with scarcity. How do we deal with this problem of scarcity where that we have an unlimited amount of wants and needs, but a limited amount of resources? So let's dive a little bit into that today. But first and foremost, I want to take a look at this guy from the 1700s by the name of Adam Smith. So Adam Smith is kind of thought to be the father of economics, and he wrote a book back in the 1700s referred to as The Wealth of Nations. Now, one of the big things remembered by people from this book is this idea of the invisible hand. So the invisible hand is just kind of this idea that's central to decision making. You know, we have a society where people make decisions constantly, and we understand that people make these decisions out of self-interest, like they're pursuing what they want. However, while that should like turn into chaos, like everyone pursuing their own desires, their own interests constantly over and over, it actually causes society to work better. He actually said that by pursuing his own interests, meaning people pursuing their own interests, they actually promote the good of society more than we intend to. Just a quick example, think about like a phone company. Let's say Apple. Let's say Apple started selling their iPhones for $10,000 a piece. Well, would anybody buy an iPhone for $10,000? Well, the answer is probably not. And because nobody would buy them, Apple would have to lower their price. Now, Apple is lowering their price out of self-interest, right? They're lowering their price because they want to be able to make money. But who's benefiting from that? Well, all of society is, because now they're able to get a phone for a cheaper price and a good phone at a much cheaper price. So therefore, by Apple pursuing their own interests, they're actually kind of promoting that of society as a whole. And we see that's how this works out in this free market or laissez-faire economy, you know, wherever everyone has the freedom of choice and people have the freedom of choice to act in their own self-interest, trying to maximize their wealth, you know, trying to maximize what we might refer to as their surplus, like doing the best they can. And all society is actually benefiting from this. And again, Adam Smith referred to this as the invisible hand. This idea that there are these invisible market forces that are kind of guiding us toward this point where, you know, society is working at its best together, or we might refer to this as the equilibrium. But again, we'll talk about that at a later time. So going back to our definition, we had this idea that people have a virtually unlimited amount of things that they want or need. Well, again, just to define a few words today as we go through, what are wants and needs? Well, the biggest difference is that a need is necessary for survival. Food and water and shelter, those are all things that we have to have in order to live. Wants are not necessary for survival. It might be that you want a new car, or that you want a new phone, or you want a cup of coffee. You know, those are all not necessary for survival, but it's still things that we might want. And again, we have things that we might need too that are necessary for survival. But we also have to look at too, what is it that people want and need? You know, we talk about a cup of coffee or food or shelter or whatever, but we actually put those into categories as either a good, which is a physically tangible object, like an actual thing, like a phone is an actual thing, or a service. A service is intangible. It's an action, it's an activity, like getting a haircut or going, flying to another state or something like that. Those are all services. They're intangible actions, intangible activities. However, you're still having a want or a need that's being satisfied. Now, we'll also categorize our goods into two different categories by asking ourselves two different questions. First of all, how long is that good going to last? And then for what purpose was it made? So when we talk about how long will this good last, we're going to say that our goods are either durable or non-durable. A durable good is just something that is meant to have a longer lifespan. We're going to kind of throw up an arbitrary number of 3 years. That's not something specific that is like a rule of economics. But we just say a durable good is something that's meant to last a longer time. Cars have the intention of lasting longer than 3 years. Phones lasting longer than 3 years. Those are all durable. They're meant to last over time. Some goods are non-durable. I think an easy one to think about is food. Food isn't meant to last for a lifespan over 3 years. Maybe your pencil, once you use it enough and sharpen it down enough, you get to the point where it is unusable probably within 3 years. And so we talk about goods being either durable or non-durable based on how long that good will last. But also for what purpose was it made? Was it made for consumers? Like, was it made for final use by individuals? Like a pencil. That pencil was created for you, the individual, the consumer, to use. Or is it a capital good? Now, capital goods, what we say, are just goods that are used to help us make other goods. So, for example, if I was to go on a flight and fly from here down to Florida, that flight from here to Florida is a service, right? Me getting from one place to another, that's what I'm paying for. It's a service. However, the airplane is a capital good. The airplane, its final use was intended to provide that service. Maybe machinery as well. Machinery that is in factories in order to make stuff, in order to make goods, that's a capital good. Its final use is meant to help produce other goods. So we'll be sometimes, putting our goods into these different categories, either durable or non-durable, or consumer or capital. So people try to make decisions to try to satisfy their wants and needs, right? Well, we have to understand, how do we know if these goods and services will satisfy their wants and needs? Well, in econ, we assume that everyone acts in what we call rational self-interest. Like, we're looking out for our best. We're looking out for our ways to maximize our utility. Utility is just that pleasure, that happiness, the satisfaction you get from consuming a good or a service. So whether it's consuming a cup of coffee or buying a certain shirt, whatever it might be, that provides you with a certain amount of satisfaction. Now, again, this can vary from person to person. We'll see here in a minute. But we don't go around talking about this in terms of utility. We talk about it in terms of value. Value is a monetary worth that we place on goods or services based on the utility it provides, right? So, if I really enjoy coffee and I really enjoy a cup of coffee, I place a value on that, meaning I might go to a Starbucks and I say, hey, I'm willing to pay $3 for a cup of coffee, right? That $3 that I place on that value on the cup of coffee, that's measuring the satisfaction or the pleasure or the happiness that I get out of that cup of coffee. It's saying that I'll get at least $3 worth of pleasure, happiness, or satisfaction from that cup of coffee. But again, because, some people might like coffee, some people might not. Some people might like a certain shirt, some people might not. The utility that something provides us, and therefore the value then, is going to vary from person to person. It might even vary from person to person based on the time of day. It might vary from person to person based on where they are at or what the season is, or whatever it might be. So then we have to determine also, if we're going to make decisions all the time, if we're going to decide how to satisfy our wants and needs and what we're going to use to satisfy our wants and needs, we have to decide, is that decision worth it, right? And so we oftentimes use this concept known as marginal analysis. You might hear it as like a cost-benefit analysis, where we compare, hey, is it worth it? Does the benefit equal, or is the benefit greater than the cost, right? Now, you're going to see this word marginal come up a few times. Just know that the word marginal just means additional or extra. That'll come up a few times as we go. But again, like we said, marginal analysis measures, hey, what is the benefit? What is the additional benefit I am getting from consuming something versus what is the additional cost I have from consuming it? So let's say you are on your way to school and you pull up to a red light. Now, as you pull up to the red light, what you all typically do is stop at the red light. Now, you're making a decision. You're doing a cost-benefit analysis without even really realizing it. What's the benefit of running that red light? Well, the benefit is maybe you get to school 30 seconds earlier. But what's the cost, right? You think about the cost, you might get into an accident, you might get a ticket, there's all sorts of costs that you might incur. And so you weigh the benefit versus the cost. And, typically if we see that the benefit is greater than the cost, that's a logical decision. That's a decision that we'll make. But in this case, like with running a red light, if you notice that the cost is much greater than the benefit, like the cost of getting in an accident or having to pay a ticket, that's much larger than getting to school 30 seconds earlier. We'd say that's an illogical decision. We wouldn't make those decisions. We're rational people. We make decisions, and in weighing these benefits for the cost, typically where if the benefit's greater than the cost, that additional benefit, we're going to make that decision. But if we see that the benefit is less than what the cost is, we're probably not going to make that decision. Well, one example we might see this is like, let's say you go to the donut shop and you want to get a donut. And let's say every donut, the additional cost that you must pay to get a donut is $1.15. Well, you walk in early one morning and you say, you know what, I'm really hungry. I haven't had breakfast yet. Donuts just sound really good. I would pay up to $2 for a donut, right? What you're saying is the additional benefit that you'd get, that utility that you would get, is at least $2 worth. That's why you place a $2 value on it. Now, if we do this, this cost benefit analysis, you say, hey, the benefit I get is $2. The cost is only $1.15. Is that a logical decision? Well, yes, it is. The benefit is greater than the cost, right? So that's a decision that we're probably going to make. Let's say you eat that first donut and then you walk back up to the counter to make the decision for a second donut. And you look at that case and you say, you know what? A second donut would give me $1.50's worth of satisfaction, right? I'd receive $1.50's worth of utility out of that. Now, first thing I want us to notice is that our marginal benefit went down. By consuming a second donut, we see that we don't get as much benefit from it. Well, why is that? Well, we could really just say that, you know what? After we consume one donut, we kind of, satisfy that hunger a little bit. We have that sweet tooth has been satisfied, whatever it might be. So what we see is that second one is $1.50 worth of value that we place on it, but the actual cost, the additional cost, is $1.15. Is that a logical decision? Well, yeah, it is. The benefit still exceeds the cost. How about a third one? We value it at $1.25. Well, again, that benefit is greater than the cost. So yeah, that's a logical decision. Now, once we get to the fourth donut, we might be feeling a little bit full or maybe even sick to our stomach. And we say, hey, a fourth donut is only worth $1 to me. Well, if it's going to cost you $1.15, but you only value it at $1, is that a decision you're going to make? Well, probably not, right? Because our cost is exceeding the benefit. Therefore, we'd say it's an illogical decision. Same thing with a fifth donut or a sixth donut or anywhere on from there. We see that, hey, those decisions aren't worth it to us. And again, we refer to this as marginal analysis, where we kind of take this idea and weigh the benefit versus the cost. So going from there, we understand this idea that, hey, we can't satisfy everybody's wants and needs. We have like an unlimited amount of wants and needs that we have if we were to take a list of everything that everybody wanted, because we don't have enough resources, right? We use resources in order to make goods and services, and we use these goods and services to satisfy wants and needs. We had established that a little bit earlier. So what are those resources that we use? Well, first of all, we have to understand these resources are scarce. There's not a lot of them. And this is the issue that is central to economics. Scarcity, this idea that, hey, there's only a limited amount of something. These resources that we're going to use to produce these goods and services, they are scarce. There's a limited amount, and therefore we can't make enough goods and services to satisfy all those wants and needs that people have. And again, this idea is central to economics. Economics is this study of how societies deal with the problem of scarcity, how they make decisions when they're faced with this problem of having a limited amount of resources. So as we go throughout this entire class, we're going to see how does this issue of scarcity central to the topic of economics. So again, what are the scarce resources that we use to produce goods and services? Well, they're going to be capital, entrepreneurship, land, and labor. So first of all, I want to kind of define what these are. We'll start up there with land, and you might think of land as just like a plot of property. Well, that's kind of right. What we're going to say within economics is that land is just natural resources. The best way I think to think of this is land is anything that goes into the actual final product itself. It becomes part of the good or service. So, for example, I like to think of like, say, building a table. We're going to build just a good old wooden table. What are the natural resources that go into that wooden table? Well, the wood, obviously, that's a natural resource that becomes part of the table. The screws, the steel or whatever that goes into those screws that makes them, that comes from a natural resource, and it's becoming part of the actual table itself. Now, if I have wood and if I have screws, how am I going to put them together? Well, for that, I need capital, right? Capital is that human-made resources, my drill, my saw, maybe if I'm have a big enough table making company, I might have a factory and more machinery and all these different things to make the tables. Now, these do not go into the table themselves. They do not become part of the table, but they're used to help us make the table. But again, if I have wood and screws and a drill and a saw and I just set them aside, are they going to build a table? No. What do we need there? Well, we need the labor. Labor is the actual human work time, the human work effort that's used to produce these goods and services. And so we have to have actual physical labor. But the final important one is entrepreneurship. You might have heard the word entrepreneur, like a business person. That's right along the right track, because what these business people do is they are that human element, similar to labor, but however, what they do is they're kind of the brain behind the operation. They take the capital, they take the land, they take the labor, and they combine them together. They make risks and then organize those together to make goods and services. And so we need all four elements of this as we go through and discuss our goods and services. Now, again, money is not a resource. We always think about like, oh, well, money is a resource for us, but we also have to understand money allows us to get economic resources. Yeah, we might refer to it as a resource in other senses of the term, but money itself is not an economic resource. It allows us to buy economic resources, but it itself is not an economic resource. So again, capital, entrepreneurship, land, and labor, they are known as resources, but more often than not, you might also hear me call them the factors of production, or you also might hear them called inputs, because they're inputs, we put them in, and out comes a table or whatever it might be. An easy way to remember these two, and I'll always list them in this order because CELL, sell, is a really easy way to remember these: capital, entrepreneurship, land, and labor. So once we understand that all four of these resources are used in order to help produce goods and services, we've kind of gotten to the end of our definition, right? We say that people have attempted to satisfy their wants and needs with goods and services. In order to have goods and services, we have to have resources. However, our resources are scarce, therefore we can't make all the goods and services that we need in order to satisfy wants and needs. So, because these are scarce and wants and needs are unlimited, societies constantly have to ask themselves three questions. And these three questions are really important for us to understand, because whenever we look at economics as the study of decision making, these are the kinds of decisions that societies, that economies, and even people have to make regularly. So if we look at this and we say we have this set amount of resources and we have wants and needs we have to satisfy, we have to ask ourselves three questions. First and foremost, what are we going to produce? What is it that we are going to make? How are we going to make it? What are we going to produce? How will we produce it? And finally, for whom will we produce it? These three questions, these decisions that are being made by economies, they make up what we call our economy. Like how these questions are answered make up what we call our economy. For example, in the United States, these three questions are answered by the people, the buyers and the sellers, the market. Therefore, we see that we have what we call a market economy, right? In, say, like, Soviet Russia, these three questions were answered by the government. The government decided what was going to be produced, how to be produced, and for whom to be produced. And what we see there is that because those three questions are answered by the government, we refer to that as a command economy. We'll dive into that more a little bit later on when we get into 1.4. But again, it's important for us to understand this definition of economics. The idea that economics is all about how people attempt to satisfy their wants and needs whenever there's limited or scarce resources. And so all these definitions that we kind of saw today give us a foundation for what economics actually is.